Hotep peace, everyone. I'm Dashan Farad. Welcome to another edition of Expressions in Blackness, a show in which I speak with prominent Black figures from across the diaspora. Today we have with us a good brother, friend of mine from out of New Jersey, a very talented director, among other things. Brother Hafiz Farid is an award-winning writer, producer, director, and the founder of the multi-award-winning film company, Foremost Productions. He recently produced and directed the much-acclaimed film on Dr. Maya Angelou entitled Reflections of a Blessed Soul. He is currently working on an exciting new project based on a chapter in the lives of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This documentary is titled Two Sons of Georgia. So we're going to be speaking with Hafiz for a few minutes, and I can assure you that this will not be a boring conversation. And anytime I speak with Hafiz, just like a few other people, I always take out my pen and pad. So this is definitely going to be a learning adventure. Family, if you would like to donate for the maintenance of the show, you can of course send me. You can cash at me at $DFarad, Venmo Dashan Farad, Zelle and PayPal both at 347-898-5556. Hafiz, welcome, good brother.
Thank you. And first of all, let me just say thank you for the opportunity to come on and talk about this very noteworthy project. And I really appreciate this opportunity, especially at a time where mass media is controlled just by a few companies. And therefore, the general population doesn't really get a chance to get alternative news and information. So it's very important. Einstein once said that there was going to come a time where about 5 corporations will own all the media that American citizens intake. And he said that very few people will have their own opinions because they'll be programmed by these conglomerates that control almost all the media. And then he ended saying, we're in that time now.
Well, I'm glad you said that, Hafiz, because what I meant to say in that little intro is that we've noticed for at least 20 years, of course, we've always had independent filmmakers, independent revolutionary filmmakers. We've always had that, but we've noticed a rise in that within the past 20 years. But specifically, we've seen that number increase amongst African American filmmakers, independent filmmakers such as yourself. And people are not aware of this. Many people are not aware of this, but a few months ago, I spoke with Brother Hafiz with 3 other independent Black male filmmakers. We wanted to have a sister on there, but we couldn't get her. And we addressed some of the issues that independent Black filmmakers have to experience. So, Hafiz, briefly, I want you to tell people how you got involved in filmmaking, and then we're going to move on to the documentary that we're definitely looking forward to hearing about and seeing.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and it's a question that could be answered in a substantial amount of time, but I want to capsulize it and get right to the point. But I started out writing poetry in elementary school, and a poem is a short story, and you begin to understand. And I had some very good teachers at an elementary school level who encouraged me and told me I could write. And that's why it's so important to tell young people that they can do once you recognize certain young people's gifts, and all young people have gifts. We're all artists as children. We learn to paint, we learn to sing before we learn to write, or talk even. And so at a very early age, I began to write poetry and read poetry. I come from an era where reading and being smart was cool. Having a book and carrying a girl's books, and even coming out on the corner and seeing older brothers with books in their pocket. That was part of a whole era and a generation that unfortunately no longer exists. And so I was introduced to storytelling and writing and reading at a very early age by coming in contact with Claude Brown, Man Child in the Promised Land, the autobiography of Malcolm X, you know, and books like that. Amiri Baraka, growing up in Newark and hearing that whole Black arts movement and hearing Amiri and Sonia Sanchez and Don Lee. And so it was an incredible period of being surrounded by storytellers and writing. And I was impressed. And I was already, as I said, as a young person, inclined for that. Then the other thing is that there were movie theaters where I grew up in the city of Newark. Every neighborhood had a movie theater. You didn't have to go to a mall. There was no such thing as fourplexes and sixplexes and eightplexes and 10plexes and 12plexes. You went to your neighborhood movie theater. You could walk to the movies as a young kid, and your parents felt that you were safe, and you could go to the movies and stay in the movies like, half the day and watch multiple films, and Newark at one time had over 15 movie theaters. And that's an incredible dynamic when you think about it, that every neighborhood had their own movie theater. So movies were a part of the everyday experience. And even Newark still, I think, is one of the first places that had a drive-in movie theater. And so this was an incredible experience, to be surrounded by storytelling, film, and of course that inspired me, encouraged me, and had me begin to think about, wow, if I can write, maybe I can be a storyteller.
You know what? That actually sounds, Hafiz, that sounds it sounds familiar. The other filmmakers that, we've heard from that have actually had a similar background, but there are very few that I've spoken with, I would say, that would mention the poetry aspect. So it's very interesting. You already, as you said, poetry, that's nothing but a small story. So that was kind of like foreshadowing for yourself.
Yeah. And it is a short story, and usually, but the beauty of poetry is it takes something that could be expounded on in volumes in a whole book, but it capsulizes it down, in a very.
Speaking of poetry, I wanted to mention for our viewers that Brother Hafiz here was also the manager of legendary hip hop group Lords of the Underground. So I'm not at all surprised that he was the manager of a hip hop group because, as our brother said, he was a poet. So briefly, what was your first film?
The first screenplay.
First
screenplay. I wrote, and I started out writing screenplays, hoping to, go to Hollywood. At that time, that's where you had to go. Unfortunately, now today, young filmmakers don't have to do that. They don't have to go to Hollywood. They don't have to go to Paramount or Universal or MGM. People are making films now and creating their own websites, and that website is their channel, and they're going right to streaming services. So the game is played, the playing field is level, thank God. But I first wrote my first screenplay, and it was called Going Straight. And it was about the struggle of two young Black males, a coming of age story, kind of a buddy movie. And it was about two guys who had grown up in urban America and were caught up in the criminal life, and yet wanted to go straight, and the struggle it is to go from street to industry. That struggle still is true today, from young brothers in the street who find themselves, caught up in the fast money, chasing the bag, the drug game. How do you go from street to industry? And so that's what the film is about. It's called Going Straight.
Okay, so I take it played in multiple areas. I take it.
Well, that was a screenplay. Unfortunately, we didn't get the film made. Unfortunately, we almost got it off the ground, and later on, it became the subject of a multi-million-dollar lawsuit with Paramount, which is a whole nother story that I don't really want to take up the time to talk about now and take away from Two Sons of Georgia. But the first film we made was a film called Pillar of Salt, The Bitter Woman Syndrome. And it's not about bitter women, it's about bitterness. And bitterness is a equal opportunity employer. Bitterness affects all of us, male, female, Black, white, young, old, and it's a stifling uh, uh, dilemma that can actually choke our creativity, uh, affects us mentally, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. And we were examining the effects of bitterness. And that film is a multi-award winning film and has been shown throughout the United States, won multiple awards, and even was chosen in the very prestigious film festival in West Africa, in Burkina Faso. That film festival is called FESPACO. And FESPACO is a festival where they actually invite filmmakers from all over the diaspora. So you're there with filmmakers from Senegal, from Nigeria, from Morocco, from uh, Kenya, from all over the diaspora. And then they started including filmmakers from places that Africans had been dropped off during the slave trade, like Brazil, like America, like Cuba. And that was an incredible experience.
Well, let's get to this documentary you have coming up
Mm-hmm.
that you've spoken about for quite some time, but it's actually in production
Yeah.
as we speak. Tell us about it. What's going on with that?
Well,
Et cetera, et cetera.
yeah, it's a passion project of mine. It's a project that I may have gotten the idea or the inspiration to desire to do this decades ago, literally decades ago, you know, over 20 years ago. And it was a passion project that's based on uh, a, a dream, a wish, and a commitment that I made to myself that one day, if God willing, that I would be able to tell a story that included the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and highlight his achievements among us. And I regard him as the greatest performer of African American people that ever walked the face of the planet Earth. And it was a long time coming. A lot of my life was spent in following his leadership and in the organization called the Nation of Islam, and reading, studying, listening to him, and studying him, you know, against the course of events that was happening in America, and even the intersection between his ideology, which is what the film is about more so. It's not a biographical film about a biography of Elijah Muhammad. It really is about the ideology of Elijah Muhammad, which was self-independence, you know, separation, but not just separating physically, but separating mentally, culturally, economically, so that he was emphasizing to African Americans that we have to have
Hold on, Hafiz, if I may interrupt you, we might be having a sound issue. I don't know if you're blocking something. Oh, go ahead now.
Okay, so the emphasis of Elijah Muhammad's program was self-sufficiency, do for self, and at the same simultaneously, in the 1960s, you had a group of individuals who were pushing an ideology that was just the opposite. So there was like two trains running in opposite directions. So you had a group of African American leaders who were pushing integration. And, you know, whether you talk about A. Philip Randolph, Roy Wilkins, Martin Luther King, of course, was one of the chief advocates. And so these two ideologies were contrasting, and it's very interesting to focus on that, because here we are in 2023, and we're still wrestling with which one of those solutions, which one of those blueprints was the best for us, because neither one of them were fulfilled. And so we're still, as Dr. King, in his great book, the last book that he wrote before he died, the title is called Where Do We Go From Here? Community or Chaos? And I think that answer is clear without me even trying to answer. Are we in community or are we in chaos? And so Dr. King had the vision, as did the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, to see that we were at a time where something must be done. One of his albums, "The Time and What Must Be Done," and he warned us, and he warned America, and here we are finding ourselves now still beating against the doors of the United States Congress and the Supreme Court, trying to open the door that has just closed somewhat about affirmative action. You can't use race anymore to get into colleges, and that's affecting young African Americans all over the country, millions. And that whole affirmative action law pushed by Martin Luther King and others was purposely for the reason of the fact that we had been held back as a people. We had not been allowed to go to universities, the University of Alabama and Georgia and all these other universities, until we fought and died and got hung and lynched and, and got shot down like James Meredith did. And so we're still fighting these same battles over 75 years later. We're still fighting for voting rights. We're still fighting to have the right to vote in certain states, in voting laws and the like. And in the economic situation, the disparity is greater than it's ever been. And we're still now fighting for equal education. They say New Jersey is one of the 6 most segregated school districts in the country. And so we find ourselves in the same dilemma. So that's the relevancy of the film, is that the ideologies that were espoused by both leaders are still relevant today and still have to be confronted, dealt with, and implemented.
So, Hafiz, I want you to, briefly, we keep hearing about a meeting, that one meeting or that happenstance meeting or the interaction between Malcolm and King. But there was another meeting that took place that most of us are not even aware of. Can you go into that, if you would, which is the basis of this documentary?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. We divide the documentary kind of into 3 parts. The method, meaning the methods of their ideologies. They had 2 varying, contrasting ideologies. So the methods, the real meeting, we call it the real meeting. That's kind of a second chapter. And the third chapter is Memphis and all that entailed of Martin Luther King going to Memphis and helping the garbage strikers, and the FBI simultaneously plotting his death and he eventually being assassinated. So yeah, it's called Two Sons of Georgia because we're saying Two Sons, as a matter of fact, is spelled S-U-N. And if anybody wants to get some information about the film, you can go to twosonsofgeorgia.com, but don't type in S-O-N. Even though they were both native sons of Georgia, the state of Georgia, our title is Two Sons of Georgia. Symbolically, these 2 men were 2 of the brightest and most illuminating lights in the darkest period of our time.
Now Hafiz, saying that is going to cause a storm with, certain followers of Garvey, followers of Malcolm, Booker T. Washington, the boys. That's going to cause a storm.
Well, they're all a continuum. They're all a continuum. I simply said these were 2 of the brightest lights during a period of the darkest times in our history. And each one of them was a light. Each one of them was a great freedom fighter. And they all borrowed from each other, learned from each other. And that's the beauty, that we have to see them as a continuum, and they respected each other. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad and Martin Luther King respected Marcus Garvey, and they respected these other leaders that came before them. And so it's not a competition of saying one is greater than the other. We have to begin to see these leaders and these freedom fighters that we were sent and blessed with. They were all part of a chain, a continuum. And when we begin to see that oneness, I think that's the key. And that's one of the main focuses of the film, to show the oneness. The Two Sons of Georgia did come together. Martin Luther King, to your point about Malcolm, all due respect to the brother, the great Malcolm X, but Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, contrary to what most people believe, only met for a minute. And this is documented Dr. King said it in his own words. And there's a book out right now by Jonathan I called King or Life. It's a 500-page book that is a very scholarly work. Dr. King said in there and many other places that they were in Washington, D.C. at a hearing on the Civil Rights Bill, and they were both there at the same time, not scheduled to meet, but they happened to bump into each other, and a photographer took a picture, and they had a few words. In Martin's own words, he said, "I only met Malcolm X for a minute." So the real meeting, which we call our second part of the film, took place between the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and Martin Luther King. And it was after a series of letters and correspondence between the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and Dr. Martin Luther King.
So what date, Hafiz, did this take? Most people, what is the date that what year was it?
These letters, both these men were under FBI surveillance as far back as 1958.
Yes, yes.
And this can be documented by FBI documents, and some of that are declassified now. And that's the thing about a documentary filmmaker. You got to make sure your facts are, intact. And we have a excellent researcher by the name of Tamar Davis, who is a master's degree in library research and also a director right now of a library. And we painstakingly excavate these facts and data so that we are telling the story factually. And so 1958 is the first letter that we uncovered through FBI documents of a letter written by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad to Martin Luther King, inviting him to come to Chicago to speak to his followers. And you will see that letter in the film, and subsequently, another letter was written in 1966. We also have the copy of that letter from FBI documents. And in that letter, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is imploring Dr. King to come to Chicago to meet, to discuss the plight of Black people. And in that letter, he says, if we have any love and respect for each other, then the destiny of 22 million Black people is too serious for us not to have a united front. And that's the key, a united front. W.E.B. Du Bois and Garvey were never able to come together for whatever reason. We know that. Booker T. Washington and Du Bois couldn't come together, across their ideologies. You see what I'm saying? And we can go on and on about many leaders, different viewpoints and ideologies, who were never able to come together and form that united front. And many now understand after their deaths or before their deaths that was the only way. We have to have a united front. We must have a united front.
So now, Hafiz, we have just a few minutes to go. So I want to ask you, when do you plan to have this completed? And where do you have it? What plan do you have? I should say, are there any film festivals or streaming services that you're going to use?
Well, the plan and the goal is to have this film completed in 2024. We're working diligently daily and every day and night to do that. We are hoping to get the support of the African-American community and communities beyond the African-American community to help raise the funds so that we can do this film independently, outside of Hollywood. When you say independent filmmakers, independence, in my opinion, means that you control the film, you direct the film, you make the final cut. When you make those deals, even as a filmmaker, independent filmmaker with Hollywood, many times those deals have inherent in them giving up the right to make the final cut, and you're giving away your independence, and you begin to try to tell the story they want you to tell because they're financing. So that's a very big thing. So 2024 is our goal. We have a screening, a sneak preview of this film scheduled on February 13th, which is a Saturday in Newark, New Jersey at Shack's Theater. And right now the plan is to have this sponsored by Councilman Kelly, who you mentioned earlier, Councilman Dupre Kelly, and also in conjunction with another councilman, Councilman Larry Crump. And we hope that that comes into fruition. And then that would be something that we would do a sneak preview and share it with the public free. public will be invited to come to see this sneak preview free of charge.
So where can people find you online if they wanted to support?
twosonsofgeorgia.com. That's our micro movie website. You can see a trailer of the film. You can find out about the filmmakers.
Now, when you say now, Hafiz, just to, because unfortunately, you have many people that have comprehension problems.
Mm-hmm.
That TWO, or is
yes,
it
rather than the numerical number,
TWO,
sons, SUNS of Georgia.com. And it can be all lowercase, and you can Google it and it comes right up, and you're able to see a trailer, you're able to get information, you're able to read about an outline, you're even able to see scenes from the film and know a little bit more about the company and what we've done. And there's also a link to our website where you can see numerous films that we've done, all award-winning films.
Okay, well, Hafiz Farid, we thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Family, thank you very much for tuning in to another episode, our second episode of Expressions in Blackness. And of course, if you would like to support this show, you can actually find the information in the box below. I'm Dashan Farad, always a pleasure. We're looking forward to you joining us very soon. Full tap, peace.